The Battle of the Somme, 1916, a grim epic born in the fires of trench warfare. By the middle of 1916, Europe was suffocating under the weight of a war unlike anything it had ever endured. Nations that once lived in uneasy peace were now locked inside a vast steel trap stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss frontier. On the Western Front, British, French, and German troops were pinned inside a maze of trenches carved into the earth, hundreds of miles of mud, barbed wire, and misery. Every offensive dissolved into slaughter as machine gun nests, entrenched artillery, and belts of wire turned open ground into a killing zone. Anyone who dared cross the infamous no man's land gambled with death, and the advantage, more often than not, lay firmly with the defenders, yet the Allies could not accept the continued German occupation of northern France and Belgium. By late 1915, London and Paris had agreed on a major summer offensive meant to push the Germans back and relieve pressure across the front. But in February 1916, Germany launched a ferocious assault on the fortress city of Verdun, one of France's most symbolic and strategic strongholds. Verdun's defense demanded nearly every reserve soldier France possessed. That left Britain with little choice. The burden of the planned summer attack would fall almost entirely on British shoulders. The man tasked with carrying out this offensive was General Sir Douglas Haig, commander of the British Expeditionary Force. Privately, Haig preferred to strike near Ypres, a region he knew well and where the strategic objectives seemed more coherent. But coordinating with France meant shifting the offensive to the valley of the Somme, a quieter sector on the map but one which Germany had quietly transformed into a fortress. Their defenses were layered, a forward trench, a support trench, a reserve line, each linked by communication trenches and guarded by thick wire that could stretch for meters. Villages had been fortified into strongholds, machine gun positions overlapped to create interlocking arcs of fire, and deep dugouts, sometimes more than 10 meters underground, kept German soldiers safe even during the heaviest bombardments. Worse still, many German divisions stationed here were hardened veterans. To crack this iron wall, Haig and Lieutenant General Henry Rawlinson devised a plan built upon overwhelming artillery. About 1,400 guns, field pieces, howitzers, and heavy artillery were assembled for a massive, week-long bombardment. The goal was simple: shred the wire, bury the trenches, and wipe out as many defenders as possible. 19 giant mines were also placed beneath key German positions, ready to erupt moments before the infantry advanced. To the north, the British Third Army would stage a diversionary attack at Gommecourt. British commanders genuinely believed the German front line would crumble after 7 days of shelling. The infantry assault was scheduled for 7:30 a.m. on July 1, broad daylight, so artillery units could clearly observe their targets. Many of the battalions preparing for the assault were POWs battalions, groups of young men from the same towns, workplaces, or clubs who had enlisted together in 1914. For many, July 1 would be their first taste of battle. But as the decisive hour approached, troubling reports came in. Despite firing 1.6 million shells, British heavy guns were too few, their crews often inexperienced, and thousands of shells were faulty. Some exploded early, others not at all. Large stretches of German wire remained untouched. Deep underground, German soldiers waited safely for the shelling to stop. Even worse, intercepted communications and captured officers revealed that the Germans had a fairly accurate idea of when and where the attack would occur. At 7 a.m. on July 1, British artillery reached its peak intensity. At 7:20, the massive mine beneath Hawthorne Ridge erupted in a towering column of earth and smoke. British troops rushed toward the crater to seize the position, but the explosion had alerted every German within miles. At 7:28, other mines detonated across the line. Then, at exactly 7:30, the barrage lifted toward the German second line, and waves of British and French soldiers climbed out of their trenches to advance into no man's land. What followed became one of the darkest days in British military history. As soon as the shelling eased, German troops swarmed out of their dugouts and sprinted to their machine gun positions. Contrary to later myths, many British soldiers did not march shoulder to shoulder like parade troops. Numerous units had crawled forward just before the barrage lifted to shorten the distance they needed to cross. But in sectors where wire remained unbroken, especially in the northern half of the front, British infantry were funneled into narrow gaps, and machine guns tore them apart. Amid the catastrophe, some units managed remarkable achievements. The 36th, Ulster, Division captured Schwaben Redoubt but was eventually forced back. The 32nd Division seized Leipzig Redoubt, while the 34th took control of the Lochnagar crater, today one of the most striking relics of the battle. Still, these tactical successes were tiny compared to the grand objectives of the operation. Communications chaos made everything worse. Field telephone lines were repeatedly severed by artillery. Early radios were unreliable. Runners, signal flags, lamps, even carrier pigeons, all could be wiped out by a single barrage. Because of this, British gunners had to stick to pre-planned schedules, shifting their fire regardless of whether the infantry had kept pace. If troops fell behind, they lost the protective, creeping barrage and were left exposed. Aerial reconnaissance from planes and observation balloons helped, but weather and German aircraft often limited their usefulness. Headquarters sometimes learned of battlefield developments hours, or even days, after they happened. Meanwhile, on the southern sector, results were far more promising. Despite heavy losses, the British 21st and 7th Divisions captured Mametz and isolated Fricourt, forcing the Germans to withdraw overnight. The 18th and 30th Divisions took Montauban by late morning. The French XX Corps, equipped with superior heavy artillery, crushed German defenses in its sector and captured about 2,500 prisoners. South of the Somme River, French colonial troops seized another 3,000 Germans. Here, German defenses were weaker, and French gunnery, renowned as the best in Europe, proved devastatingly effective, yet none of these successes could blunt the grim reality. July 1, 1916 became the bloodiest day in British history. While France suffered around 7,000 casualties and Germany roughly 12,000, Britain endured a staggering 57,000 casualties in a single day, 19,000 of whom were killed. The Somme offensive dragged on for more than 4 brutal months. Rain turned the battlefield into a swamp, and each advance was paid for with thousands of lives. By November, the Allies had gained only about 10 miles of ground, at the cost of 430,000 British casualties, 200,000 French, and roughly 450,000 German. The Somme had become a symbol of industrialized slaughter. To later generations in Britain, the Somme represented futility and flawed leadership. But to those who lived through the war, its significance was more complicated. The pressure at the Somme helped relieve the French at Verdun. Germany was forced to reevaluate its defensive doctrine. The British Army, though bloodied, learned hard tactical lessons that shaped its later victories. And for the men who survived, the Somme was a defining chapter, a bitter, painful step on the long road toward Allied victory.